Okay, what's up, everyone? I finally got the opportunity to watch Moon Knight, and I know it came out like a week and a half ago, the last episode in particular, but here I am talking about the review a bit later than that. But nonetheless, let's get into this review. So, let me first start off with my initial thoughts. And I have to first say, I really love this show. I had a great time with the show. I pretty much had a blast with the show, if that makes sense. And the best part of this show was that it kept getting better as the show kept progressing, and that way I was like hooked to the show. I didn't like feel like leaving the show halfway through. And I'm going to explain why I felt like that. I'm going to have to first start off by talking about the performances of the actors, especially Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke. They had brilliant performances as their characters. There are also other great characters. For example, I think the actress name is May Kalmawi, who plays Layla, the wife of Mark Spector. She was also very great. I liked how she comes at the end with her own suit to help out Moon Knight fight against Ethan Hawke's character as Arthur Harrow. However, I also really like the scene where she's playing herself and then the goddess that took over her. I think the way she was transitioning from one character to another simultaneously certainly required some acting skills. So I really wanted to appreciate that because I really saw that as pure talent to be able to transition like that. So once again, I just wanted to appreciate that as well. Now let's talk about Oscar Isaac and Ethan Hawke in particular. So first of all, Oscar Isaac, the fact that he had to portray two different characters that were like quite contradictory of each other. One was Stephen Grant, and then the other was Mark Spector. I think it was just amazing to watch how he played these two different characters. So we first have like Stephen Grant, who's this gift shop employee with this British accent, and then who's clueless about what's going on. And on top of that, his life isn't that great, given that he gets mistreated by his boss. And on the other hand, you have Mark Spector, who's a ruthless mercenary from America, who has made his deal with Khonshu, the god of night, to stop Amit in order to repay his debt of killing the people he has killed. So that was also a very interesting character in my arc, and these were two contradictory characters, which I think he played amazingly. And I'm going to talk more about them later. But before that, let's talk about Ethan Hawke as Arthur Harrow. So honestly speaking, I have to say there were times when I actually found him to be more interesting than Oscar Isaac's character, whether it be Stephen or Mark, because his character was just that well written. I think the way he was working for Amit and had the motive of purifying the world, albeit in an unethical way, which I'll talk about later. As of course, he was the antagonist of the show. It was a very interesting concept to me, how he was basically, like, kind of like the underling of Amit. However, the nonetheless his character was very interesting. I especially wanted to also talk about his entrance in the show, like the way he makes his first appearance while sorry, the way he was making the appearance by entering this crowd. I was like touching him and praising him, basically worshiping him. I think that was a very interesting interesting introduction to him. Really got me hooked to his character that way. And then I also liked him how he was playing the doctor, where he was like calm and wise and preaching Mark about the world. Once Mark like reaches the afterlife, once he shoots Mark. So that was also very interesting character to see him play. I particularly liked him in the show as both the kind of characters. Now, of course, let's talk about Steven versus Mark. So from where I saw it, it was basically like the brain versus brawn. So like Steven is the brain mainly because he had been working at a museum with Egyptian artifacts. That's why he had knowledge about Egyptian mythology. And then Mark is a mercenary, so it would make sense for him to do all the fighting, which I'll also come later. And then I think this combination, as contradictory it was to me, it was also very perfect and satisfying because once again, brain versus brawn. Like Steven was the brain and Mark was the brawn. But then it was also hilarious to watch, Steven try to handle situations by himself, but then Mark would ask him to allow him to take over. Just seeing them, fight against each other was like verbally, of course, certainly was fun to watch. But honestly speaking, it certainly got emotional quite soon, which I'll also come to later. But let's talk about the action scenes slash sequences. So from what I know, from what I had learned before watching Moon Knight or knowing anything about Moon Knight, was that he was supposed to be Marvel's Batman. But he's certainly quite different from him because not only is his character, but also the way he fights is also quite different. I think the fact that he can fly and in his origin story is completely different from Batman, and also the fact that he kills certainly makes him different from Batman. And now moving on to the action scenes though, I think my favorite action scene was the final fight scene with Harrow. I think the way, we finally learned their purposes in this show and how who stands for whom. Moon Knight stands for Khonshu, and then Arthur Harrow stands for Amit. And the way, they both are fighting for each on two different sides, and the way, the fight scene was executed, all of that was just very satisfying for me to watch. So that's why that was my favorite action sequence. And another scene I also liked was when Mark was also fighting on the terrace in Egypt against those mercenaries, I think, but albeit, without his Moon Knight suit. Nonetheless, I still like that scene too. Now let's talk about Khonshu versus Amit and just their ideologies and how they differ from each other. So from what I observed, despite their ideologies being quite different from each other, I think the fact that it's still involved, both their ideologies involve punishment. For example, Khonshu punishes those after their wrongdoings, and Amit punishes those before they could commit the wrong act. I think it's understandable why Khonshu might be on the right side more than Amit would be, and that would because of how contrasting their ideologies were. However, I think at the end when Khonshu tries to motivate Moon Knight to kill Arthur Harrow so that Amit never comes back to life, and then Moon Knight just says it perfectly that Khonshu is now no different from Amit now that given that he's also self-interested and wants to kill people out of his own interest. I think certainly showed Khonshu not always being right all the time. So it was like not very black and white, which was very interesting to watch in the show. Now, the ending. I said I was going to talk about ending. So I wanted to talk about ending because from where I perceived it, I thought, like everything just came full circle after looking at the ending. And I'm particularly talking about a scene where, Steven and Mark are traveling on the boat. And then, we from there we get to learn that they're basically the same characters. I think the way they were explaining it was very satisfying and brought everything full circle. Like when they show, the whole scene where where Mark's the whole process of Mark Spector turning into Dr. Grant, or like trying to impersonate Dr. Grant, whom his brother was a fan of. And the reason for that being, reason for him impersonating Dr. Grant was that his younger brother gets killed and he keeps blaming himself because he can't stop blaming himself. Like he that way, he starts to impersonate Dr. Grant. I think it was sort of disorder, I would say. I think just looking at the whole transition of Mark becoming Steven was very emotional and more understandable why he was and why he had a second personality of Steven Grant. Now, of course, there's also the post-credit scene which I wanted to talk about, and looks like there's a third personality as well, known as Jake Lockley, and using him, Khonshu finally kills Harrow, even though they never show it. But it's best to assume that Harrow gets killed eventually, rather than complicating things too much. However, it looks like after looking at Jake Lockley, looks like they have certain things set up for season 2 now. So I'm really looking forward to season 2 now and what they do with Jake Lockley. Now, my final thoughts for the show was once again, like I said, the show was a great show. I had a great time watching the show. I think the story for in this season was also well paced and well executed, and that's really why I found the show to be great. And also for that reason, I feel like this comes in my top 5 Marvel shows as well. And of course, I'm also looking forward to season 2 now. To season 2 now after what they showed in the post credit scene. So that's all I had for this review. Tell me what you thought about this show and this review as well. And here's a reference. And until next time, see you next time.